Welcome to the City Club of Eugene's June 7th, 2024 program, Creating a Culture of Belonging at the City of Eugene. My name is Andrew Kallick, and I am City Club's president. We're coming to you from the Garden Plaza at the 5th Street Market in the heart of downtown Eugene, and it's my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to our speakers and to all of you joining us here in person, online, and over the radio. For 3 decades, the City Club of Eugene has remained dedicated to its founding mission, to build community vision through open inquiry. In accordance with our mission and purpose, we hope to help connect people throughout our community and across generations, identities, experiences, and perspectives. You are invited this week and every week to join us in this effort, to share your wisdom, to learn something new, and to take active steps to make a difference in this city and region that we love. Of course, we cannot do this work alone, so a special thank you to our Platinum, Community, and Diamond sponsors. The Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce, serving as a catalytic leader in creating a vibrant and diverse economy that drives economic opportunity and well-being. Kaiser Permanente, which exists to provide high-quality, affordable healthcare services and to improve the health of our members and the communities we serve. More information at www.kp.org. The University of Oregon has helped Oregonians question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and live ethically since 1876. Get more information at uoregon.edu. Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, visit lanecc.edu. And thank you to the City of Eugene and to Lane County for their support as well. Whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a longtime listener, I invite you to support our work by becoming an individual member, a business or community sponsor, or volunteering to be part of a committee. You can do all those things and more at cityclubofeugene.org. With that, I'll turn the mic over to Fabio Andrade, coordinator of today's program. Fabio.
Thanks, Andrew. The City of Eugene has adopted a strategic plan for the first time, and in its plan, the city has added a goal of creating a culture of belonging. And that's in alignment with the City Council's vision of creating a community that is safe and welcoming for everyone. This innovative approach aims to understand and enhance community belonging through city policies, programs, and services. Also through how staff in the city interacts with community members when people come to request some services. The plan emphasizes the importance of strengthening relationships with all community members, especially those in underserved communities. But what makes people feel like they belong to a place? How can we measure the sense of belonging for an entire community? To answer some of these questions, we have Mayor Lucy Vinis, who will be speaking about the significance and the impacts of adding such a goal to the city's first ever strategic plan. And then Josh Bates, the executive director of the City of Eugene's Library, Recreation, and Cultural Services, will detail how his department, and similarly all the departments at the city, are trying to implement that idea of culture of belonging in everything that the city does. Myself, Fabio Andrade, Equity and Community Engagement Manager, will briefly address how we are trying to measure, define and measure what community belonging is. And finally, we have Jensina Hawkins, a community member and a member of the Police Commission, who will present a community member's perspective on what it means to belong to the city where we live. So I welcome Mayor Lucy Vinis to start us off.
Good afternoon. It is wonderful to see you, and I know there will be folks listening to the radio, and so I welcome you all. Thank you for listening in. Shortly after I took office in 2017, I attended the State Economics Summit in Portland, and a graduate student from the University of Oregon addressed the audience with these opening remarks saying, "People say that Oregon is becoming diverse. I have news for you. Oregon is diverse." The demographic numbers tell one story. The communities of color in Eugene represent less than 20% of our total population. But those numbers eclipse the larger story of the deeper, richer, and also terrible history of this community. When we talk about a culture of belonging, we start by braiding that more complex history into our understanding of who built this community. And in doing so, we shift the language and our thinking. To use the common metaphor of a guest at the table, they enter from the outside and experience hospitality. But belonging is more than welcoming. Belonging acknowledges that the person at the table was part of the creation of the meal and the table itself. So let's start by thinking about belonging by reflecting on where we've been, where we are today, and where we're going. So where we've been. Our community has a troubling past. The settlement and creation of our community and state is founded on the displacement of the indigenous people who lived here, and the dark and very recent history of policies to destroy their connections to the land, the integrity of their culture, and their value as human beings. Our city's Central Park, Alton Baker, was the home of Eugene's Black community because they were not allowed to live within the city limits. They were then forced to relocate farther west to an area with no support or infrastructure in order to make room for the Ferry Street Bridge to be constructed and for that park. And as a national heritage, we share the shame of internment camps for our Japanese friends and neighbors during World War II. And to this day, return to the table metaphor, we are grateful for the fruits and vegetables that are largely the product of immigrant laborers who are struggling to survive. None of this history is new to you. And the easiest path for this predominantly white community would be to complacently look at that as the past. But here we are today, experiencing a resurgence in hate crimes targeting our Black, Asian, and Jewish communities, violence against LGBTQ communities, and the continuing dehumanization of immigrants. It is all too clear that policies substantiated by programs are essential, certainly in the first case to keep people safe, but more importantly, to enable everyone who lives in our community to share and contribute to the opportunities for a rewarding and healthy life. That brings us to the present, where we are now. Under my predecessor, Kitty Piercy, the city adopted the triple bottom line as a framework to consider three impacts on policy decisions: economy, environment, and equity. This is a foundation for where we are today because in adopting that policy, the city implemented a standard and a process for evaluating our work with more specificity, with more attention to the targeted populations, to the outcomes, and how we would measure them. During my tenure, the city has invested more deeply in this work. Our Climate Action Plan 2.0, for the first time, incorporated an equity panel to ensure that the communities that are disproportionately impacted by climate change would be able to advise our work. Our response to George Floyd's murder in 2020 resulted in the creation of an ad hoc committee on police policies to make recommendations to ensure that our Black, Indigenous, and communities of color both feel and are fairly and respectfully served by our public safety system. As mayor, I have a unique role and capacity to act on this promise, and I seek opportunities to work with our diverse communities and to change our patterns. In 2022, as Fabio mentioned, the City Council adopted the 2023-25 strategic plan, which for the first time opens with a commitment to create a culture of belonging that strives to cultivate a community where everyone feels included, respected, and valued, and that uplifts the diversity of people who live here. So where are we going? The work to translate this still aspirational goal into systemic changes is how we serve our community. Leadership matters. The council needs to set priority and values. The mayor needs to champion that work. But elected leaders come and go. The institutions live on. I am joined here today on this panel with people who do that work, who translate principle and value into programs and opportunities, and who provide that insight back to council to share where it's working and how we might do better. As the graduate student said, we are more diverse than we realize and richer in human ability and experience than we acknowledge. The promise of the future hinges on our commitment to creating a culture where everyone feels free to contribute to and benefit from the life we live together.
Oh geez, I'm gonna mess this thing up. Can y'all hear me? Oops. There we go.
Don't make it too tall, some of us gotta follow you.
I'll readjust. Good afternoon, everyone. Just a real quick disclaimer. I'm having terrible allergies today, so if I start crying, I swear it's because of the allergies, not because of the content of this conversation. And I also, another disclaimer, I did not write my talking points with Mayor Venice, although they are very similar. Some of them are very similar. So when I've lived here I was born here in Eugene, but I've lived here in Eugene recently for just under a year. And one of the first things that folks told me is that Eugene isn't really diverse. It's getting better, but it isn't diverse. And much to Mayor Venice's point, our community is actually more racially diverse now than ever. And also we're economically diverse. We are orientation diverse. We're gender diverse. We are a diverse community, even sometimes when it doesn't appear so. And it is our goal in the department that I support, that I lead, Library, Recreation, and Cultural Services, that diversity informs our programs, our approach, our customer service, our service in general. That really the entire structure of our department doesn't just support, but enforces a sense of belonging amongst our entire community. I'm gonna use an example real quick from my personal life. When I first moved here, my youngest sibling decided to come visit me. And that weekend, there was our annual Pride event. So I went over there with my sibling and their 100-pound Great Pyrenees and walked around Alton Baker Park. We had great conversations, experienced really amazing booths, sat along the river and just were present. And at the end of that conversation, at the end of that day, my sibling goes, I think I could live in Eugene. They started looking for a home here in Eugene. It didn't end up happening for other reasons, but it really spoke to me. Like, that's the power of belonging. That's the power of being able to see yourself reflected in a community and also be able to bring your full self to a community. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about the programs that my overall department facilitates. There's 3 different divisions. There's cultural services, recreation, and libraries. And belonging really undergirds all 3 of them. In cultural services, we have an Arts in the Park grant. We support a number of different community festivals. We support Pride. We support the Black Cultural Festival, the Oregon Asian Festival, really ensuring that our community is able to put on events where people can show up as their whole selves and also enjoy community. Additionally, we also in cultural services facilitate and lead the Holt Center. So at the Holt Center, that's one of the pillars, I think, in our community. We put on really amazing shows, Broadway shows, and we have amazing resident companies that put on a number of different programs there. We try to eliminate barriers by creating free and low-cost tickets to all of those shows. And also we work with local education organizations and the school districts to have educational programs where kids can actually get up on stage, see what happens behind the shows, and realize that, hey, maybe I don't have the experience or background to be up on stage, but I belong here on stage, here in Eugene. But it's not also just in cultural services, it's also in libraries. One of the things that I was really impressed by here when I joined this organization is that we don't have fees. We don't have late fees anymore. However, historically, fees were a huge barrier to access for folks. And also it created a dynamic where oftentimes people had a worry about entering into our library. And I also didn't work on my talking points with the person that's coming up next. Additionally, we have materials. We want to ensure the materials at the library reflect all the people that walk through the doors. So that way, if you're a child and you're questioning any aspect of this society, you're able to pick up a book or talk to a librarian and see yourself reflected in that conversation or in that material, where you know that you're not solely the one that going through some experience, but actually you're part of a larger network, a larger community that cares about you. Another thing that we do at the library is in our adolescent, in our preteen space, we have a box where kids can come up and write anonymous questions, drop them into the box, and have librarians respond also anonymously. You should see some of those questions. There's questions around identity, around love, around domestic violence, what is okay and what is not okay. And so, once again, we are trying to ensure that the customer service at the library, that the relationships that we have with our community support their journeys and also provide more information. Finally, at the library, I will share a little bit about our youth and our teen space. We actually worked with our community to design a teen space that where teens can walk into the library, know that they are safe, know that they have caring adults, and actually see things that they love throughout the space. They help design the space. So really, we also want to ensure that our spaces reflect the diversity of our community. Finally, I'm going to go to recreation. Our recreation director, who has been a part of our city for over 20 years, Craig Smith, he recently announced his retirement. And then he gave me this book, History of Recreation in Eugene. He's like, Josh, you need to read this. So I sat down and I read this book actually a couple weekends ago. And it talked about around 20 years ago, a group of both community members and staff decided to start an LGBTQ youth group in the Amazon Community Center. While for a very long time, the LGBTQ community has been organizing against injustice across this country, we were one of the first municipalities in the entire country to be able to explicitly support that community. And it's still going on 20 years later. People have gone through that space, have made friends, built relationships, and seen themselves reflected in that space week after week, month after month. Additionally, one of the amazing things about living in Eugene is that we are here in the Willamette Valley. I feel so great. Well, I feel so in awe every time I drive up and down I-5. But also, all of that open space can feel risky, can feel unfamiliar, especially for folks that have historically been prevented from accessing that space. So in recreation, also what we've done is we've built groups, youth groups, that are oriented around affinity, whether that's the LGBTQ group or whether that's a BIPOC group, to be able to go into the outside, explore safely with caring adults, and build a relationship with this amazing space. So finally, am I at 6 minutes? Oh, all right, I'll wrap it up. So finally, I'll say one final thing. Recently, I just bought my first home 2 weeks ago. Oh, geez. It was absolutely terrifying. I was like, they gave me a packet that I have bigger than anything I've seen since grad school. And I felt not just present in buying a home, but also conflicted. Because to Mayor Venice's point, this area here was and is indigenous land where folks were displaced. As Mayor Venice said, also at Alton Baker Park, there was a black community that was displaced. And now I drive over near Alton Baker Park, and I see $750,000 homes. And there's folks from that community that still live here that were prevented from being able to access that wealth. Also, part of the original Bill of Rights here in Oregon is that black folks were not allowed to live here under the threat of violent punishment. So actually, me just being able to own a home here in Eugene, it was not always guaranteed. So when I think about belonging, and I think about the role of government, the government has historically created really terrible outcomes for many marginalized communities, and especially communities of color. And as we move forward, when it is our role as government employees, as officials, to be able to redress some of those harms and ensure that our community services, programs, and structure is persistently telling people that they belong and showing it with their work. Thank you.
Let's see if Fabio made this short enough for me. I'm Jensina Hawkins. My name, if you haven't heard the name Jensina before, is actually Danish. Folks on the radio can't see my face right now, but I can tell you right now that my face does not look Danish. The reason for that is because I'm Korean. I'm adopted. I am a Holt adoptee. I grew up on the coast in Reedsport, very, very impoverished town after the lumber economy took a dive. And let me tell you, I've grown up as an Asian in a very predominantly white community. I moved to Eugene in 1998. I turned 18. I bought my first pack of cigarettes, put my first personals ad in the newspaper back then when they had personals ads in the newspapers, and I moved to the big city. As an Asian, we actually got the long straw when it comes to stereotyping. People think that we are smart, we are great at music, we're probably really good cooks, and as an Asian woman, there's a whole lot of expectations of what I do, especially if I am married to a white man. But all of that never ever was the biggest problem that I had in my life. When you grow up in deep, deep, deep poverty, and you become an adult, also still in deep poverty, that's what runs your life. Not necessarily, yes, there's racial things that come into play, there's gender stereotyping, discrimination that comes into play. But when you become a single parent, because life happens, it doesn't go the way that you planned it, even with all of your Asian plans for longevity and a 5-year plan and a 10-year plan, but life still happens. So when you find yourself as a very, very, very poor single parent, the race doesn't matter nearly as much, the gender doesn't matter as much as trying to put a roof over your children's heads. I'm excited about the programs that Joshua is bringing to town and that the city of Eugene has put in. When I was 18, living in Eugene, I got a library card because it's free. And I started racking up library fines because I couldn't get to the library to return my books. Transportation is an issue when you don't have access to income and all sorts of things like that. Back then, the bus pass cost $1. I didn't have $1. So I was racking up, I think, $14, $32 in library card fees. Moved away, I got married, moved away from Eugene, came back in 2006 as a single parent, and I thought for myself, you know what, I cannot afford anything for my son, but I'm gonna go to the library and I'm gonna get a library card because at least there's free books and he can go to story time maybe, although it's hard when you're a working parent because you also don't have the luxury of daycare. And if you don't have parents or family living in the area that can help you out with watching your kids, you don't have a lot of flexibility either as far as what sort of time you can spend with your kid. So I went to the library, they ran my driver's license and said, you have a $32 fine from 8 years before. I didn't have $32 in my pocket. There was no way I could get $32. So I took my 3-year-old son by the hand and we went home. And I cried and cried and cried so much that night, thinking how much of a failure do you have to be as a parent that you cannot even get your kid free books? I spent a lot of time in that poverty. I have spent about 20 years in the Willamette Valley. I have raced my kids to the door of our apartment because I knew there would be an eviction notice on the door. And I wanted to get there before they did because eventually they got old enough that they were able to read and they would see that and they would ask what that was. So I would park the car and I would bolt to the door just to take that notice down off of the door before they saw it. I spent a week in the Johnson unit here in Eugene because when you are in so much poverty and you're so depressed and you feel like such a failure that you cannot put a roof over your kids' heads when every single paycheck, when you're working, you can't work overtime because there's a limit on your daycare hours that the government has helped you pay for, and when your paychecks aren't enough to pay the rent, you think, what on earth can I possibly do? So my plan was I had life insurance. That was one of the few expenses I could afford. It was $24 a month. So my plan was to work a full pay cycle at my job, and then I was gonna fall off of a bridge somewhere in the Willamette River in December. I can't swim. My plan was that hypothermia would paralyze me so I could not accidentally struggle my way to shore. And that full pay period paycheck I hoped would be enough to get my kids through until my life insurance kicked in for them to finally have a home and a house that they could call their own. Things have improved greatly since then. I'm now a business owner. You know what though? I have a husband and we are a dual income middle class family. We can't buy a house. I'm so jealous of Joshua right now because we are priced out of this housing market. We make decent enough money that we can't qualify for any of those programs out there to help, but we're still renting. I've never paid a property tax in my life because I've never owned property. So with the city of Eugene creating these programs to create more of a sense of belonging and to help the folks that need more of a hand up, one of the favorite things I'm able to do now is be able to volunteer. I couldn't volunteer at the Food for Lane County drives before. Thankfully, because of food stamps, I never actually had to experience food insecurity, but I wasn't also able to go and help anybody else who had that because I had the little kids. I had nobody to watch them. So I'm looking forward to what we all can work together to do now as a member of the Police Commission and on the board of our local neighborhood association. I love seeing these programs and bringing more awareness. And in my tiny little corner of the world, I love to connect people with the resources that the city offers. So long term, I hope my husband and I, my husband happens to be Black. We plan to own property in Eugene. And in the short term, I plan to take our two Blasian daughters to the library probably this afternoon because school got out for elementary grading day. And I think I'm gonna go get a library card.
Thank you, Jensina, for being so honest about and sharing your life experience with us. So we heard from a very different, very diverse panel today. Myself, a Latino immigrant, moved here 10 years ago and have been lucky to be able to own a home in Eugene, make this the house for myself, my family, my kids, and work for the city now. So trying to understand what is it that makes people of so many different backgrounds experience a sense of belonging in Eugene. It is not an easy task. Measuring it is very complex because the things that can make someone like myself, Jensina, Josh, or Mayor Venus feel like we belong in Eugene may be the very same thing that makes someone else feel like they do not belong. That's why we get hate crimes, that's why we get discrimination, or people moving, as they say, voting with their feet. They move where things are to their liking. So the task of coming up with an instrument to measure belonging has been attempted by several organizations. We have a few instruments that have been in use all over the country, but we do not have a standard saying what belong is or what it means and how to measure it. So the city is right now trying to listen to people and understand how can we come up with an instrument that fits the needs of our community and help us understand where we go from here. So having this topic on the City Club of Eugene agenda is great because now we can actually, when you come back from the break, answer your questions, and they may help us understand what is it that we need to do to understand how people experience a sense of belonging in Eugene and how we can impact that sense for everyone who lives here. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. As Fabio said, we'll begin our question and answer in just a moment. But first, I'd like to thank the business and in-kind sponsors whose support helps to make City Club possible. Thank you to our gold sponsors, Network Charter School, Hirschner Hunter LLC, Evans Elder Brown and Subert, Hudson Dental, and Luvis Cobb. Thank you also to our in-kind sponsors, KRVM 91.9 Radio, Alpha IT, Dot Dotson's Photography, and Kid Sports. Also a special thank you today to our award-winning public radio station, KLCC FM 89.7, for airing City Club programs Monday nights at 7 p.m. For those listening at home or in the car right now, your household is one of several thousand tuning into City Club on KLCC, and we love that you are here. You can also find all recent City Club programs archived on KLCC, as well as on our YouTube channel and as podcasts. We'll be right back for the last part of our program. Thank you. Welcome back to City Club and our program on creating a culture of belonging in Eugene. First question, Kitty Piercy.
So my question is, when I decided a long time ago, it's really hard for people to meet goals if they don't know what the goal is. And we suffer from this community about knowing a lot about what we don't like or don't have, but not knowing enough about what we want and then measuring how to get there. I heard a lot of things today about your understanding of what belonging is. I wouldn't, in my opinion, and I'll ask the question in a second, but in my opinion, I think it's not so much finding out what that is again and getting it, it might be getting it confirmed by the public, but I think it's putting it in front of people. And I'd like to hear from you whether you've had that conversation and whether you have a plan for how to let the community know where we're going so they can all help you get there.
I really appreciate that question. I think we do have an amazing array of different programs that I think reflect people's beliefs, people's identities. But to your point, if folks don't know that they're there or they're inaccessible, then how is that in sort of creating a general sense of belonging? So one of the really big things that we're trying to do is ensure that all of our services are both in front of folks through multiple different marketing strategies, but also that we're getting outside of our buildings a bit and meeting folks where they're at. So we recently created convened an outreach team to develop outreach strategy and develop also some great materials for outreach. But also later this year, we're going to be embarking on a strategic planning process to really identify how our department as a whole is coming together to support belonging and how we're measuring that belonging, to your point. Because I think that it really is important to both do a lot of different things to enforce belonging, but also tell our story on how we're doing that and making sure that folks can hear that story, and that if we need to deviate, did this mic just change? Oh, there it goes. If we have to deviate, if something's not working, then we're able to adjust. So it's a bit of a wait and see, but we are doing some intermediate things right now.
And in addition to what Josh just shared, there is a website where people can look at the plan, so City of Eugene, and search for strategic planning. So the plan has some goals and some strategic actions, and right now staff across the organization are investigating how can we measure what we are saying we're going to do. So there is a push for data, so us to understand how are we changing the status, and how can we prove that it is working. So it is an initial stage, and we welcome community participation. So one of the actions that we're going to embark on in the coming month is redesigning our community engagement plan and guidelines. And there will be some surveys going out for the community to understand what is it that people want us to do in terms of community engagement, how they would like to be considered in this process, and the multiple ways in which the city shares information and collects information from community members.
And as mayor, I would just say, in the broader sense, right, that I said in my remarks that it's really the responsibility of the mayor to champion this work and to speak to it repeatedly. And I think as the sort of public spokesperson in that sense for the community, that it's really my role wherever I can and wherever I am and with whomever I'm speaking to sort of continue to talk about this need for engagement, the level of engagement, the opportunities, and to understand from people that I'm talking to what information do they need to actually know that this work is going on, or what information do they need, like the library, to know that there's an opportunity for them. So I think that as elected officials, it's our job to be aware that these programs are available, because we have the pulpit so much of the time to communicate that.
Thank you. Jerry.
I'm Jerry Smith, a City Club member, a longtime social worker, very long, I'm 88. One of the things when people present poverty, they always go to the minorities, to the people of color. And there is a higher rate among people of color than among the white population. But in terms of numbers, the overwhelming number of people in poverty are white. Because we tend to focus on the minorities, the southern states, the racists, shut down public assistance. There used to be 75 to 90% federal money available to help poverty, and it's gone, absolutely gone. And what we have in every state, every city thinks their homelessness is the worst, but it's every state, everywhere. We've no longer take care of American people the way we used to. Do you think that maybe putting out the issue of white poverty might help you in communities? There's a brand new book by a black writer, Bishop, what's his name, Browning? Bishop Barber, the head of the Poor People's Campaign, called White Poverty, by a black author. It's time we got poverty back to the mainstream. You got any ideas how we can do that?
I will start just sharing a piece of information that we have included in how we offer information and training to the City of Eugene staff. So in our internal trainings on equity, the principle is that when you focus on the groups who have been impacted the most, you end up helping everyone else. So the reason sometimes in communications we focus on some underserved communities is because of the historic information we have about people by law not being able to access some services. But in our trainings, we also mention, for example, that Eugene has a poverty rate that is double that of the country. And because of our population is mostly white, most of the poor people in Eugene are also white. So there must be a difference in how we communicate these things. So people can understand that we have to pay attention and focus on what happened historically and try to fix that. But the work has also to impact everyone else who is struggling with their income and providing for their families, which in the case of Eugene includes mostly white people.
Yeah, I would just echo what Fabio said. So for instance, eliminating late fees at the library, that is a race and gender neutral policy. It doesn't actually have any identity associated with it. And it likely impacted folks that were disproportionately experiencing poverty. So I think that creating different policies that, to Fabio's point, sort of raises the tides of all, raises the waters of all ships, and helps folks generally is really important. But I also really do think it's important to be able to identify and understand the historical reasons that we're seeing current outcomes, especially when it comes to groups that historically have experienced marginalization and now are disproportionately experiencing things like trauma, poverty, and other negative outcomes. So I certainly hear what you're saying around ensuring that policies support the vast array of folks that are here in our community. And two, I think that through doing that, creating policies that do things like eliminate fees, we're able to support folks that have disproportionately been impacted by oppression.
I work for a company whose mission statement is to create a world where anyone can belong anywhere, which sounds like Silicon Valley speak, and it is a little bit, but it's also a deeply felt mission. And I think that's because there is a deep human need across cultures and societies for this sense of belonging. Why is it so hard to achieve, both as on an individual level and as a collective level? We at the corporate level see a lot of barriers to it, but I'm curious from the community level, what you think some of our biggest barriers are to achieving that sense of belonging, again, on the individual and collective level. Thanks.
As a community member, I would say it's not being aware of what's out there, especially when you are hampered by anything that may put you at a disadvantage, whether it be poverty or racial perception or gender. It's very nice to know that I'm speaking as the only non-city employee here. It's very nice to know that there's a website that can talk about strategic planning, but I can tell you when I'm deep in the throes of need, the last place I'm going to go look on is the City of Eugene website. And so, you know, I'm on Facebook a lot. I see a lot of groups. Thanks to my husband's work with the NAACP, I'm aware of a lot of resources out there that I never knew were there. They may have been there 20 years ago. I didn't know about them. And to this day, for folks who are in deep, deep poverty like I was, is as very well connected as I like to think I am with the city, most of the time I don't know where to send them. So I would say awareness.
Mary Layton, City Club of Eugene. I want to start by saying the library is awesome. I'm a frequent flyer. I go to the library in person, like at least 3 times a week. And one of the ways the library has achieved inclusiveness is embracing the number of homeless people who hang out there during the day, maintaining a standard of conduct, but responding appropriately to things which are a little unusual to see in the library. So one of the possible metrics is a survey of library users across categories that asks, do you feel at home there? Do you feel welcome? Do you feel okay? But Jensina's point about poverty is really important. Been there, done that, single parent, 2 kids, bad job, stupid choices actually in my case. But poverty is a great predictor. It does not account for all the racial differences in economic achievement. In fact, you can control for poverty and it's still worse economically to be a member of a minority race. But I wondered if you've looked at schools, because school climate surveys, school assessments of how well the community is being served by school programs, they actually have been forced to develop defensible metrics because it's a complicated thing. And you can do counting, which helps, but you can also use other approaches in evaluation. And I just wonder, what is the scope, here's the question, what is the scope of evaluation strategies that you are considering for measuring inclusiveness?
The goal of creating a culture of belonging is aspirational and should apply to all the work done by the city. So the stage we're in right now is understanding how can we first identify which programs that the city offers that would have an impact or a direct relationship with that goal. And then coming up with measures. How can we know if we are impacting the sense of belonging or not? You mentioned partnering with other organizations like school districts, for example. There are some limitations in terms of some organizations, they prefer to keep data on things that make people feel like they do not belong private, because that might impact perceptions in the community, attractiveness to future students, and so on. So we do partner in terms of education, attending events, organizing for community response when hate crimes happen in the community, and so on. But we do have some limitations. One thing that we are trying to do more in terms of school data is focusing on the demographics of our schools districts. Because when you look at the census, we are looking at data from the past. If you look at the school districts data, they are counting their students every year, so you are looking to the population of the future. So that's a way of planning for what is coming instead of planning for what has passed already. But there is definitely room for more partnership with other jurisdictions and school districts as well.
I can add that. And just thank you for that question, or that recommendation. I think that we always want to be getting better, so we should be understanding how people are experiencing our services, whether it's in the library, in our rec center, or at the Holt Center or the Cuthbert. We do want to make sure that if something does come up, first off, that we're able to quickly address it. I think that actually, to the previous person's question, is something that can really inhibit someone feeling like they belong, right? Is walking into a space and being met with a microaggression, or seeing a situation which clearly says, or having an interaction which clearly says you shouldn't be here. I'll actually share a little bit from my personal life. Just yesterday, I was sitting at a picnic with my kids and my wife, and a person came up and asked me if my kids were adopted, and because they present as white. And it was a little disorienting of a question. I asked a couple more questions because I'm like, why do you think that? And they explained it. But even just from that situation, it was clear that even for them, they understood there being something awry with the folks in my family, and that my kids didn't belong to me. And I think that those type of microaggressions will also inform how people navigate space. Like, will I go to that park now again? I absolutely will go to that park again. I love that park. But the thing is that I'm sure.
I want to just I almost hate to follow that comment because it's so compelling, but I just want to add that I formed at the end of 2020 a Mayor's Youth Advisory Council, and Josh actually came to one of the meetings, and that group of high school students from all across the city is our most diverse city board or commission. It is very diverse, and one of the values of that, and I think the city is increasingly taking advantage of that, is that this has become a kind of high school stakeholder group to which city staff are now referring on certain questions, and they've come to talk to them about climate, about urban growth strategies. I mean, it's so we are trying to create, and I will say that in the past couple of years, as those students pick areas of interest, hate crimes and bias and racism have been at the top of their list of things that they were discussing and wanting to act on.
Bill Kleppinger, City Club member, just recently and from a long time ago. And this isn't really a question, it's just a thought I'll try to unscramble that came to me last week. I was reading last week's Eugene Weekly. I don't know if many of you read it. It was really thought-provoking about what happened here in Eugene in the 70s. And it was about the time I came here. There was all this creative stuff going on. And then I thought, is it from these people? Is it from our elected officials? And sometimes I think we rely too much on them to solve our problems. But the people that came up with the Oregon Country Fair, the Saturday Market, Bring Recycling, they were individuals, the Cindy Wooten and things in town that just did it. So I just want to remind us all not to rely too much on these people that work hard for us. But if you've got a great idea, go for it, do it. Don't wait for the president to do it or your senator to do it or our elected officials in town. Step up and do it yourself. Thanks anyway.
I guess I would just follow up on that, and I would say that I think the creative spirit and the spirit of innovation and the spirit of community engagement is alive and well in the city of Eugene. So not to worry. There's still plenty of great ideas coming out there. There's lots of advocacy coming to the city council and to the mayor, and lots of good ideas. So we just need to make the most of them.
I don't want to hog time, I already had a turn, but I did want to say, it isn't just city staff. Your elected officials, not just you, Lucy, but all of them should be helping to have that conversation with the community. In my view, they all have a part of the community that needs to understand how the people in their part of the community belong and how they would feel more belonging. I just think there's a huge responsibility that all 8 people have to own, and I think they need to somehow get that message that it isn't just a job that you have on a piece of paper that you did. It's really something that you, as an elected official elected by the people of this community, you have a job to get out there and try to help find out what can make people feel most at home in our community.
Well, that's true. There are 8 city councilors, and I would say that, you know, one of the things that is easy to lose track of is that we have 8 wards, and those are different. Each of those, Ward 1 is different from Ward 8, and so that councilor has a different set of constituents and a slightly different permutation of problems, and so I think you're right there. Those city councilors have a special responsibility to hear their particular constituents and also to come together to think about what are those citywide issues and how do they find a path forward that all 8 can agree or a majority can agree. So yeah, it's a job to reach out to all those different corners of the community and make sure that we hear them and that we understand them and that we're responsive to their goals.
I just want to make a quick plug for our neighborhood association programs, because you heard Jensina mention that she's a member in her neighborhood association board, and that's a way that the city has to connect with residents across our entire community. So participating with your neighbors is very important. In a situation of an emergency, the city will not be able to come to everyone. So having that sense of belonging with the people who live next door to you is very important. So we just encourage people to seek their neighborhood associations and participate as much as they can.
Thank you all for being here today. Karin Knudsen, City Club member and past board member.
And mayor-elect.
And thank you, Andrew, yes, and also mayor-elect. It's a really important conversation, and I appreciate all of what you shared with us and with our community. In listening to your answers to these questions, I was thinking about how we're working to address a system and an experience that we have in community, and also about how that is delivered and experienced in one-on-one engagements and in community group engagements every day in our community. And I was thinking about the idea and the guidance of right speech, concept of being direct and honest and kind as we are relating to one another. And I'm wondering if the four of you could think for a moment and then offer all of us as a community your thoughts on what we could do as individuals and as parts of community groups to actually demonstrate and advance a culture of belonging in the ways in which each of us touch our community every day.
I have the microphone, so I'll start. I often quote one of my former colleagues in this regard that we should approach every conversation, every interaction with someone with healthy curiosity, with a sort of an openness to what might we discover or learn or find by talking to that person about their life experience, their perspective, their cultural background. That if we actually just approach people with that sort of open mind, that we just find we have created a common understanding and a sense of kind of well-being and belonging by just being ready to listen to one another. So I'll start with that.
So I have two things to respond to that, Karin. One of them being that destigmatization is a huge, huge benefit. And the fact that I'm up here sitting next to the current mayor of Eugene and friends with the incoming mayor of Eugene, 10 years ago, I couldn't have told anybody that I had just gotten out of the Johnson unit. I couldn't apply for a job saying, well, I'm eligible for employment right now because I was unemployed because I had a mental health breakdown. So just looking at the progress that we've made in the last 10 years to make it okay to be a human being. Sometimes things happen by choice, sometimes things happen by circumstances, and it's still okay. You're still a living, breathing human being. And so the other thing to say about that is that our neighbors, our friends, our leaders are human beings. And I remember being in that point of poverty where I would never be able to take my child somewhere like wildlife safari or the zoo or something like that. And one of my daughter's friends' family was considerably more well off. And whenever they went places like the Enchanted Forest, they would just quietly include my daughter. And it was their gift. And all of the programs and the resources, and I was on food stamps, and I had this and I had that. The organizational benefits, those were nice to have, but you know what? The things that stick inside my heart now that I want to pay forward to the community that I have around me and my tribe is those little moments of kindness. A $5 ticket to Enchanted Forest wasn't very much to that family, but it meant the world to me. And so if there are children needing tickets to Enchanted Forest or the equivalent of what that means in somebody's heart, and I'm able to do that, because they're a human being, that's what I want to do.
So I think that one of the things that, to your point, happens every single day is as there's interactions. And to Mayor Venus's point, you can either, those interactions can either like build trust in relationships, or they can actually have a deleterious impact. In regards to trust, I think we can't control for the vast array of interactions that happen on a day-to-day basis. However, we can control to the responses, our response to the things that we see on a day-to-day basis. So if you see something that is a microaggression, if you see someone excluding, if you see someone actually in a room that no one is speaking to, I think that there are moments where you can actually reach out and engage and to build trust with that person, but also show that person that they are seen. One of the really difficult experiences is when someone microaggresses and everyone sees it and no one says anything. So I imagine that just being able to build your toolbox, getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, and supporting folks that are in your realm is really that's a huge way that we can make folks feel like they belong. I'll tell you that after that thing happened yesterday at the park, I was very surprised, and I sat there, but multiple people saw that as well, and no one said anything, right? We moved on to other conversations, we started engaging with other ideas, and I just started playing with my kids. But it would have been great had someone came up to me and said, that was wrong, and I'm sorry, and that hurt. So I think that is a huge way that you can not just build trust, but start showing folks that they belong by engaging with their experiences and showing that they're seen and supporting them.
Josh, in the interest of bringing people in, microaggression might not be a term people know. Can you tell our audience a little bit about what that means?
A microaggression can take a lot of different forms, but essentially it is an action that occurs that is based in some sort of type of bias, but isn't explicitly an epithet or any other type of bias, right? It's not explicit. It's not the same as saying like a racial epithet, but more it's engaging in a way that is rooted in bias and shows someone that they do not belong in that space. An example would be like, are those your kids? Or where is their father, right? Like things like that. That's a microaggression. It may actually be based. I mean, I had that happen in an airport, and there was all of these different posters around human trafficking. So I'm sure someone was walking through that airport and seeing all those posters and saying, I am going to show up and support and protect people. And it just so happened that they decided that the thing that stood out was that my daughter didn't match my skin color, so I'm going to interact with this. So absolutely, it can even be based in really good intent. However, what that told me when that woman came up to me and started asking all these really intense questions about where my daughter's parents were, even though I was holding her, that is a microaggression. That's a microaggression. So it can be even with really good intent, but the impact of that was to tell me that one, I don't belong, and two, that I am under persistent vigilance, right? The vigilance of people around me.
I would just add that in our interactions with people, let's set labels aside. We tend to take positions based on the interpretations we make of other people and where they stand on different issues. But when we start asking honest questions, try to understand what is your reasoning behind your position, we can find a lot of things in common. So when we set the labels aside and we lead with curiosity, we can find commonalities and we can move forward together.
That's all the time we have for today. Please join me in thanking our panelists. This has been our June 7th conversation at the City Club of Eugene. This evening marks Eugene's First Friday event. So the First Friday Art Walk will be at the Farmers Market Pavilion, highlighting pride. And the First Friday's Communities of Color and Allies Network event will be hosted at North Eugene High School. So all are welcome to attend both or either of those. We'll be back next week, June 14th, downstairs at the Maple Room to discuss Constructing a Brighter Future, the collaborative project that creates single-room transitional shelters for the unhoused. Thank you all. Have a beautiful weekend.